Hello, and welcome to Replay Value. It's a new anime season, and there's a lot of promising fresh shows like Vivy, 86, and Odd Taxi. That last one definitely being my sleeper pick for what none of you will watch but will secretly be phenomenal. But this season, for me at least, has been a highlight because of continuations. A follow-up season in Zombieland Saga Revenge, a spiritual successor / anthology edition to Gridman in Dynazenon, and, of course, Nomad, the sequel to Megalobox. I know not everyone loved the first season of Megalobox. I personally enjoyed it from start to finish, but I acknowledge that people started losing interest after episode 6, and I similarly wasn't a particular fan of some of the sidebars the series took in the second half. But when Megalobox hit, it hit incredibly hard, and its general aesthetic, specifically its music, was always something I looked forward to and thought of fondly. But honestly, I didn't think we were going to get a sequel to it in part because, well, where do you go from that final episode? Nomad has answered that question in one of the most stunning opening series of episodes I've ever had the pleasure of watching, and I would like to take this moment to talk about how brilliant the writing is, from its scale and its characters to its themes, all to bring the audience in to tell what feels like the story Megalobox was always meant to show. As I said a moment ago, I didn't think we needed a continuation to Megalobox. That story ended on a thematically conclusive note, with Joe achieving what he set out to do in the first episode, with all of the characters reaching logical endpoints for their development / character arcs. There was no more story to tell based on the initial pitch. An underdog rising through the ranks to become champion is a complete story the second they become champion. So the single most important thing Nomad had to do in its first episode was to introduce a new element that demanded the continuation of the story. And it did this by positioning itself not as a new Cinderella story or the continuation of holding on to the crown, but rather as one of redemption. That is a significant shift in its tone, which comes off from the very beginning through the direction and plot beats of the first episode. Whereas Megalobox's first episode opened on Joe breaking new ground and finding his own way forward, that's the symbolism of the one-way sign he drives over, Nomad opens on him achieving the pinnacle, though it's already in the past, with Grayscale to assert that this is a flashback. And it's also a perspective we didn't see in Megalobox, outside the ring and the actual victory call. It is the affirmation that Joe was on top of the world, the exact opposite of the person in the original who had yet to fight his way up or accept his present state. It is the reminder of what Joe was as we left him last. And we also get our first glimpse that the story we're about to follow is not the glitz and glamour of Megalonia, as the true main character of this story arc says, "I don't belong in that ring," drawing the first of many parallels between himself and Joe. And as though Joe said that himself, when we catch up to the present day, we see that Joe isn't on the mountaintop anymore. He's back to fighting in underground rings, going by the name Nomad, and fighting with a brutal intensity matched by the overwhelming red used in the sequence. This isn't fun for Joe like boxing had been in the original. Even as he was getting destroyed by Yuri, this is savagery. Whatever has happened since Megalobox has broken Joe. He's addicted to painkillers to the point where he'll pick them from the ground around a toilet just to puke them up later. He's hallucinating Nanbu all over the place, and the shadow of his time in Pro Megalobox hangs over him both metaphorically and literally. He is, in his own words as expressed by his visions of Nanbu, running away from his past. A past that we get glimpses of through 2 TVs, one talking about a typhoon as it shows clips of locations that look very familiar to the original, and another talking about how Joe lost an exhibition match to the current Megalobox champion, though that latter one is not the center of focus as Joe is buying more drugs as it happens. Another overt reference to the past is the dog imagery, which you might remember from the way the story framed Joe and Yuri, not only in the anime itself, Junk Dog and Owner, but also in the opening theme. Joe sees his dog twice, once when he's forced to bail off his bike to avoid hitting the dog that shares his eye scar, this seemingly calling back to Vision Nanbu's claim that Joe wants to be punished, and then again at the logical end to that dog's decision to not move. Hit and killed alone by the side of the road. The parallel is super obvious here. If Joe continues doing what he's doing, he'll die. He has to change because he's getting close to the edge, and if he dies like this, there will be no one to bury him. Joe had climbed to the apex and now has fallen further down than when we first met him. He's even still fighting in rigged matches as shown when one of his opponents takes a dive, causing Joe to scream in frustration. The first episode of Nomad demands the continuation of the story. The ending you thought you had in Megalobox no longer exists. Joe's story is far from over, and watching this episode, you could not mistake it for its predecessor in terms of its tone. This is good writing, but to be clear, it's also what I expect from a sequel's first episode. The truly brilliant decision behind Nomad's first arc is the character I have been avoiding while I set up the story. If the first episode is the descent from the top of the mountain, the next 3 episodes are the glimpse at the path to redemption, because they follow Chief, the true main character of these next 3 episodes, serving as Joe's foil, foreshadowing, and friend. Chief's story from a thematic and structural perspective is genius for a few reasons. The first is that Joe spends the next 3 episodes getting out of the gutter he was in with the help of Chief and friends, and Chief's boxing story through a small tournament occurs in tandem. So thankfully, it's not 3 episodes of pure misery while we watch Joe try and get over his addiction to painkillers, it's also a tense and exciting boxing story at the same time. It's also a little bit like the original Megalobox in that it's a Cinderella story. That helps with pacing. Joe's recovery feels earned without taking up the full hour of runtime, and if you don't particularly care about that element, Chief's story alone is engaging enough to grab your attention. The second is that this story and Chief have so many parallels to both the original Megalobox and Joe's current circumstances that it's basically a microcosm of the larger story that Nomad is presumably going with, and reinforces a bunch of the motifs and concepts that we'll be grappling with. And lastly, Chief is just very well written in general. He's the heart of these episodes. He serves as an amazing foil for Joe, and the themes he brings to the forefront of the show are pertinent and beautiful. We first met Chief when he was watching Joe fight in Megalonia. He's the one who says, "I don't belong in that ring." The next time we see him, he's playing a song on his guitar in a bar. We'll talk about that song towards the end of this video, and tells Joe that unless he wants to die, he shouldn't be taking those painkillers. Joe does take that to heart and throws the pills on the ground, but his addiction is so bad he picks them back up moments later. And finally, he's the person who Joe boxes in that episode, having a more or less dead-even fight, but throwing it intentionally for the organizers to make additional cash. After Joe confronts him post-match, "Aren't you embarrassed as someone who's a real boxer?" Chief turns it right back around and asks the same question, which causes Joe to attack and Chief to respond in kind. Chief again says if not for the drugs, Joe would have gotten the punch off, and then drives off. Episode 2 kicks off with the most important line for the next 3 episodes.
長生きしたけりゃ夢なんて見るもんじゃねえ。
The validity of that statement is what these 3 episodes are going to explore, though first Joe's bike is stolen by Mio, a kid from an immigrant community, and he collapses after finding Mio's mother and seeing that they've stripped it for parts. When he comes to, he's in the immigrant community celebrating a Day of the Dead festival, and watches Chief settle an argument between the property group that's going to sell the land and the people who live in the abandoned amusement park. Chief announces his intention to buy the land so they can all live there, something his friends laugh at, which allows Chief to tee up another important theme: home, with the saying, "Mi casa es su casa," welcoming Joe into their community while they get his bike in working order. Later that night, while celebrating the dead, Joe and Chief talk about their match. Chief tells Joe honestly that he's not a pro boxer, and that even if he was, he fixes fights to make money so that he and his community can survive.
生きるためだ。生きることは恥ずかしいことじゃない。
Chief proceeds to tell Joe that he knew Joe was the former champ almost immediately, because his deceased son was a big fan, and also because Joe was their star of hope when they came to this country in search of a better life. That they could, like Joe, walk into the ring with no gear and still make it to the top, instead of the reality of working brutal jobs for no money and being rejected by the larger communities around them, like them trying to be kicked out of the park. But, as Chief says in a callback to that thesis statement from earlier,
だが俺はまだあんたが見せてくれた夢から覚めちゃいないんだ。
he'll join the local tournament, win, and use the money to buy that land. Joe repeats the line from the event organizer, "Are you willing to lose everything for that?" But Chief doesn't have an opportunity to respond. Chief asks where he'll go next, and Joe says, "Unlike you, I don't have anywhere to go home to." Joe leaves the park the following day, but Chief's words stick with him to a degree where he turns around and says to Chief, "I want to see how this dream ends," having poured his drugs down the drain. Clearly, Chief is willing to lose everything for his dream. The third episode clarifies a few elements of similarity. First, Chief knows the damage those drugs were doing to Joe because after his son died, he similarly avoided his grief by going into matches and taking those painkillers. It wasn't until his gear broke down, the gear his son helped him design, that he realized that he was running away and was able to face the true pain of his loss. That's also why this place is so important to him. Home is where he and his son can return to, as well as their whole community. Because Chief says that souls that have lost their homes are fated to wander for all of eternity. Both of these elements parallel nicely with Joe, who, while cleansing the drugs out of his system, has another fit of pain seeing Nanbu yet again. Joe said, while Chief was telling him about the importance of having somewhere to go home to, that he destroyed that place for himself, as well as everything else. Nanbu is the soul without a place to go home to, as Joe abandoned their home. And Joe, after realizing the pain he suffered after Nanbu died, and the hurt he caused to Sachio, and how that in turn hurt him, asks the spirit of Nanbu to fight with him one more time. And in that moment, Nanbu's spirit disappears. The symbolic realization of both that Joe has gotten over his addiction to drugs, and Joe's resolve to return to the place they once called home after seeing through Chief's fight. Just as Chief had changed after feeling the true pain of his loss, so too has Joe changed in this moment as well, with the capacity to continue to grow. The third episode is also where we see the local mob boss / native community leader use his influence to terrorize and demonize the immigrant community by vandalizing their walls, not letting them into the stores, and destroying their water pump. Chief single-handedly deals with every one of these issues, determined to protect their home, and his effort brings the rest of the community to help solve the water pump crisis. This leads to the final episode of the sequence, the final round of the tournament, as Chief faces off against a guy who rattles off a racist statement against Chief's people and challenges their pride. He also cheats, throwing punches at the back of his head during holds, and that causes Chief to lose his cool and take bad fights, getting knocked down. Joe is able to make him take a deep breath by pressing his hand to the hummingbird on his gear and saying, It's at this moment in flashback that we learn the symbolic importance of the hummingbird. It's the love for your homeland, and that you have somewhere to go back to. As simply as possible, it's a symbolic representation of home. That's enough to give Chief a clear head as he takes the lead with his superior fighting ability, with the other guy still taking cheap shots, which helps to get the whole crowd on Chief's side, something Chief equates with Joe in the finals at Megalonia. Chief proceeds to win the match, and in the post-game celebration talks about the crowd cheering for him and closes the argument on the discussion of dreams.
夢は人を変える。夢を見ている人間だけじゃなく、周りの人間も巻き込んで変えていく。
This is how Chief was able to keep their community together and save their home. Even though everyone was initially of the opinion that they'd be forced out, they came together to fix the pump, believed Chief could win, and did so. It got the entire crowd on his side when initially they were against him. Believing in a dream gives people hope and the strength to survive. And there is nothing embarrassing about surviving. After Joe and Chief embrace and pledge to fight in the ring against each other someday, we turn to the next day to find that Chief passed away in his sleep. Too many punches to the head, age compounded by his previous addiction, the fact that he had achieved what he set out to do by securing their home and now could go see his wife and son. You can read as much or as little into this moment as you want. But what is inarguable is that his gear, with the hummingbird that represents a place to return to and love for one's homeland, is given to Joe. And as the first episode ended with Spirit Nanbu asking Joe, "Where to now, partner?" As Joe drives off at the end of the fourth episode, he says to Marla, Obviously, Chief and Joe have a lot of parallels, from the addiction to painkillers, running away from their pain, rediscovering their home, and resolving to protect it. In the first episode, Chief jokes with the crowd asking them whose face is better, and responding after being told there's no difference that Joe's face is carrying the weight of all the misfortune in the world, whereas his is not. This seemingly throwaway line is so informative as to Chief's character, specifically his wisdom in seeing himself in Joe, and the journey that Joe had to go on over these episodes to forgive himself a little bit and to grow. Those parallels also mean that there is foreshadowing for what Joe has to do when he returns, to get people to buy into whatever his dream is going to be as a way to heal and bring back a community. And that it'll be hard at first, but that it's worth it. There's also a darker side to what could happen after he achieves that, as we see with Chief passing away, and especially struggling against forces that maybe don't want Joe to resurface. There's a lot of places Nomad could go from here, and there's more it does well here even. I didn't talk about sound design, I barely talked about Mio, but his character and how it ties into the sociological discussion you can have about immigration is a topic I'm waiting for someone to write about. But one thing is for sure about the future of this show. There's going to be a continued exploration of themes like home, dreams, family, and a symbol in the hummingbird to tie it all together. The song that Chief sings in the first episode is also the ending theme, and it's about a traveler alone in a desert wanting to die. When a hummingbird begins to sing the song, and that inspires the traveler to keep living. Chief obviously had that impact on Joe, inspiring him to head on back to his home. But the final line of the song also hints at the fate of Chief and maybe Joe as well, because after the hummingbird sings its song, it will not be returning.